All right, Mike, it's Monday morning, game week, season opener, West Virginia at Penn State. We are going to be giving plenty of preview of that game. We're going to talk about that, but let's take a quick overview of the entire season.
Mhm.
We're going to go back and forth here. Big reasons WVU wins big or doesn't. I'll start it off with you. West Virginia goes 8-4 because of blank.
The schedule. You can only play the teams in your schedule, but you play the schedule too. We've been over this before. I don't think it's one of the hardest schedules in the country. I know that they have a pretty bold non-conference slate, Penn State and Pitt. We sure about Pitt? Right? And then you look at like who they avoid in the Big 12. You don't get Kansas State. You don't get Texas. They get the four new teams, the Big 12. They have some good rest advantages, I think, and for teams that are traveling before they come to Morgantown, teams that play tough opponents before they play West Virginia. We've covered this before. Not to say it's not a tough schedule. It is. It's a Power 5 schedule. It's not one of the hardest in the country. Who they play, where they play, when they play is important to me. I think that they could scrape together some wins without being a wildly improved team just because the quality of their schedule breaks in their favor.
And I'm going to go with the offense works. It gets, let's not go so far as to say fixed, but we've talked about the defense before, where last year I felt like was an anomaly due to injuries, departures, lack of depth. Those coaches know how to coach. The defense was the strength of this team for multiple years. It was good to great for the first 3 years under Neil Brown. I think it can get back to good. So you turn to the offense, you change to a new quarterback, a quarterback who can run. Intel and kind of whispers from camp are, is this the greatest offense in the world? No, but they are breaking some big plays with that scrambling quarterback, with some deep passes. And I think you combine that with some explosive running backs, and maybe it's not the most efficient offense, but they break out some big plays, and it's one of those games. And then they can salt it away later with a good running back core and end up with a tidy 8-4. Let's flip it. West Virginia goes 4-8 because of
Depth.
blank.
Depth. I think that their front line is going to be okay. Not top of the Big 12, but not bottom. And then they replaced the parts they had to replace, or they filled the spots they had to replace with transfers and maybe even some freshmen. But you think about this, Chris. Neil Brown gave this quote about why their secondary got picked on last year. It's because one of their safeties wasn't as good in coverage as the other one, and teams were able to manipulate that. Well, guess what? They played the same two safeties darn near the entire time because they couldn't find a better option. If their best options are in the starting lineup and they're not the best players, and they're still out there because their depth isn't good enough, then what have they actually done? They've replaced a problem with a problem. If the transfers are not Power 5 ready, if the freshmen aren't ready to contribute, and those are small numbers of players for the freshman class, then that would concern me about what happens when they get from numbers, 11, 12 to 22 on offense and 12 to 22 on defense. What happens? We'll see. And this is a team that's needed it before. We saw injuries and inexperience and ineffectiveness last year really conspire to hurt them offensively and defensively. If they go 4-8, it's because that front line either wasn't good enough, the transfer portal didn't do it, or again, maybe it's injuries, maybe it's just guys who stink and have a bad season, but you can't get them off the field. If there are more answers than questions, then this doesn't seem like a problem. If there are more questions than answers and they can't solve the problems, that's going to lead them down the 4-8 road.
Do you see me smile when you said they're 8-4 because of the schedule? Because I'm gonna say they're 4-8 because of the schedule, Mike.
Oh,
But
here
not
we go.
really.
A little zag.
I am with you about the second half of the schedule, and this is something you and I have talked about on the podcast before, about how they're avoiding, like you said, Kansas State, Texas, and maybe things aren't as bad late in the season, and those other teams are playing, tough opponents the week before. But it obviously starts out difficult with a top 10 Penn State team on the road. 3 touchdown underdogs, I think last I checked. So not great. Let's assume that they lose that game. Assume they win Duquesne, and that makes Pitt the most vital game of Neil Brown's tenure probably. And I think it's just one of those schedules where if you don't win that game, it can send you down a very, very dark. So it's not necessarily the schedule so difficult. It's just that things can go south so fast and really send this whole season down a downward spiral, because you got that game, and then you're gonna go on the road, and you got Texas Tech, you got TCU, and then you got the emotional Houston game against Dana Holgerson, and things could go very, very bad very quickly if that Pitt game doesn't go right. And that's why I say the schedule might be why WVU goes 4-8.